Well, we're here at Metalworks Studio, and we're with Gil Moore, the drummer from Triumph. And Gil, before we get started, there's something I needed to show you because I attended my first rock concert in around 1986 at Maple Leaf Gardens, and I am the proud owner of this.
Nice.
So maybe, Matt, you can kind of hold it up.
I like that it's see-through at this point.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that is my Thunder 7 Triumph shirt, which unfortunately doesn't fit me anymore. But it got some wear, and it makes me think back to those days and to those moments where, yes, we have the Air Canada Centre, we have some great venues, but growing up in Toronto, was Maple Leaf Gardens the place when you're growing up and you want to be a band? Is that the place where you say, I want to be on that stage at Maple Leaf Gardens?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, when I was a young musician starting, the first time I got in the Gardens was when Hendrix played there.
Holy man.
My first music event. My dad took me to see the Leafs a few times, and for hockey games. But when I saw Hendrix, that was completely different. Seeing a music artist play in a hockey rink, just didn't think that would ever be something I'd see. You know, my eyes were like this big. And, I was 14 years old or something like that. But then pretty soon, a couple of years later, I decided, oh, this is a great thing. I saw Johnny Winter there, saw Kiss there. What a fantastic venue. And when Triumph ended up playing all the arenas across North America, I always favored the older ones, like the Sam Houston Coliseum. I much preferred to the Summit, which was the newer venue. There were numerous examples of it. Cobo Hall in Detroit rather than Joe Louis Arena. We played them both, but I always liked the slightly older generation venue.
I always ask Matt this as a drummer, but what is that feeling like the first time you sit behind your kit and you hit either your bass drum or your snare during a sound check in a venue like that, and it sounds like something you've probably never heard before?
Now, I've never played a venue like that. That's just no way, but
yeah,
wow.
You described that really well. That is exactly what it's like, because, you go from playing in a high school environment, in a high school gym, let's say, to with a minuscule PA, to or a nightclub. And I remember the first kind of few concerts we played that were beyond the church dance high school level, but were little concerts, and they were in theaters and things like that. But there's still that proximity effect of the audience, and the sense of where the back wall of the venue is, and the room compression. So when you get into a big arena like that, and like you said, the first time you hit your snare drum or your bass drum, and you've got a great big gigantic PA system, and it sounds like the voice of God. It's just it's hard to comprehend that first time, and that feeling never goes away. Like, I like that about arenas. We do sound checks, and I'd be just like.
Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight was the song that got me in. I want to know about the Comets.
The Comets? How do you know about the Comets?
I've done some research.
And you're talking about the Comets that played in Southern Ontario.
I am.
I saw the Comets when I was about 11.
And was that just boom? Was that just mind blowing?
Yeah, because it was the first time I ever saw a set of drums, and up close and being hit, and watching the audience and just taking the whole thing in. And they had a mirror ball in the it was in the Cedar Crescent Casino in Port Elgin. They had a mirror ball going around,
This is awesome.
and the whole experience was just like, again, my eyes were the size of lemon pies watching this stuff as a kid. And I don't know whatever happened to the Comets. I don't know if they have a Wikipedia or anything.
When I was maybe 14 or 15 years old, I wanted to be a singer. I had some friends that had a band. I said, can I be in your band? They said, sure, but we need a bass player, so you got to learn how to play bass. So I just learned how to play bass so I could sing. Were you a singer first, or were you a drummer first? And how did that progress? Because it is not very common for someone to be able to sing lead and play drums. And man, oh man, Matt can tell you too, as a drummer, you've got so many things flailing, and then to sing. How did this all come about for you?
I was always enthralled with drums, and I had no interest whatsoever in singing. But there came a fork in the road one I guess it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday at my band's rehearsal. And we were in Willowdale United Church. And we had a gig that Saturday night in Honey Harbor for $100. And
Like big bucks back then.
Each or no total?
No total. That was those weren't big bucks. Those were huge bucks. And anyway, we had a row at the rehearsal, and our singer quit. So the remaining musicians, three of us, were sitting there and saying, "Okay, well, what are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, we're not walking away from the $100, so that's not an option." So, so I called a buddy of mine who was a vocalist bass player in another band in town, and who was a singer, and I'd had him played with him in a previous band. And I called him and I said, "Joe, got to help me out." I said, "I got a band that needs to know how to sing. We got a gig for $100. Got to get that gig. Got to get paid. Come on over to the rehearsal, help us out." So my friend came over, and he looked at us and he says, "Okay, does anybody know anything about singing?" So the guitar player was kind of like, "Yeah, well, I used to sing some songs. What can you sing?" "Well, I can sing Crossroad, So he said, "So let me hear you." So he strums it and he's saying, "Okay, you're okay. You don't need really any instruction. You just need more songs." And, then he listened to the bass player and he just said, "You're horrible. Like, you're not singing anything." So they were, "Let's check Gil."
Bass players.
And they're like, "Well, drummers don't sing." And we're desperate. We're down to you can't sing. He can sing, but we got to have one more. So he comes over to me and he says, "Can you sing?" And I went, No. So he says, "Let's try this one." So he picks Sookie Sookie because it's kind of like it goes with the drums. The drums are going dunk 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 dunk, and you're kind of going Sookie Sookie Sookie. So anyway, he puts his head beside mine and he starts singing while I'm playing. He says, "You play, I'll sing, and then you just, my voice is right here. You'll hear it, and you pick it up as we go along." And literally sat and just did that all afternoon. So I learned Sookie Sookie, and then I don't know what else I learned that day, but got to the point where I had fumbled my way through, enough songs, and the guitar player Cam had fumbled his way through enough songs that we thought we had it together. So we just decided to keep the PA really low and turn the amps really loud so no one could hear what we were singing anyway, And we played the gig, and we got the $100, and we came back, and that was how I did it.
Like, you have such a beautiful singing voice. Did you had no idea then the gift that you had? I mean, I as a longtime Triumph fan, I mean, your voice is absolutely phenomenal, and to not know that you had that in you at that age.
Well, thanks for saying that, but I never really enjoyed singing. I always hated the sound of my voice, and there was one change, late in the band's career. One day I was in the studio, by accident I hit a couple of notes in a row that I actually liked the sound of, and I got the engineer to play it back again. I said, "Gee, I almost like that," and it was like the first time I ever sort of heard a little snippet.
What song was that?
I don't recall. It was when we were doing the Allied Forces record. Towards the end of our career, I started to enjoy singing, which I think is one of the keys. Like, music should be fun, and for me, drums was always fun, always a blast. But singing, I just despised it, until that one pivotal change. And I thought, it's too bad that I didn't, maybe get some lessons when I started, and I might have enjoyed it all those years. But I wouldn't advise singing and drums at the same time. It's like telling somebody to be an electrician and a plumber at the same time. Sooner or later you got 240 volts in one hand, you put your other hand on the drain, and you're done. So it's the same thing with drums and singing. That's why there's not many of them.
I was always curious to know, as far as harmonies and such, finding your note, did the size of the venue affect finding a note?
At that time, we didn't have in-ear monitors, for example, where you can really hear. So there was always a smear effect. Where I was, which was on the drum kit, I had backfill monitors, and my drums were so loud, it was like, it was like having a cement mixer over your left shoulder and a cement mixer over your right shoulder, and a guy driving a backhoe behind your back. So what are the chances you're going to hear the kind of the nuance of intonation, coming out of floor wedges? So for the most part, it was guesswork where I was sitting. I think maybe, with Rick, he could up at the front of the stage, he could hear himself better. You know, if you're a lead vocalist and you're on the front of the stage and you've just got wedges and you've got the guitars kind of 20 feet that way and the bass 20 feet that way and the annoying drummer behind you, you've got a better chance of picking up what's going on. And the speakers have gotten so good now. Like the speakers that we deploy now on our shows, holy smokes. They're like laser beams, these things are so good.
So with regards to volume, because we're talking, and I'm trying to search for any sort of discernible hearing issues by the sound of your voice. Oh, man. Okay.
There's your discernible hearing issues.
There's a message to kids,
take
right?
those out,
Absolutely.
I can't hear what either one of you guys are saying.
Because I was going to say, I remember talking with the former guitarist for Megadeth, and you talk with him, and he's screaming at you whilst talking. And I was going to ask you about cement mixers and backhoes, and obviously there has been some sort of effect on your hearing.
Yeah, I'm deaf as a stone. That would be the result, you know.
Oh, okay.
Next question. I can hear a little bit, but you know what? It's an advantage at times because at night when I take the hearing aids out,
It must be beautiful.
it's beautiful. Like you'd think you were in Algonquin Park, you know.
In the early 70s, when Triumph started playing some of the clubs like the Gasworks, and you decided, hey, we don't want to be just like any other band. No, we're going to have flash pods and we're going to have explosions. That may have contributed to the hearing loss as well, but in the long run, was it worth it? Was that what one of the things that made Triumph stand out from other bands is the fact that you weren't just these three guys making music, you had a show as well?
I think absolutely that was the differentiator because, you know, all the bands I played in prior to Triumph, you know, the audience reaction was kind of, time is it? You know, I think I got to go to the washroom, you know. And I compared all those notes with Rick and Mike, and it was the same thing. It was like, and we looked around in the environment we grew up in, you know, and all the bands really. You grew up in a sea of failure bands, you know, like all the bands that were around.
Yeah.
Some were failed less than others, but they were all failing. I was telling my kids this the other day. I was listening to a song on the radio that came across Q by Luke and the Apostles.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was a kid, I remember like Luke and the Apostles thinking, wow, you know, they're gods. You know, Luke Gibson is so amazing. And I do think they were great and amazing. But none of the bands from Toronto really could, you know, get record deals, get launched, play nationally as opposed to regionally, never mind getting across the 49th parallel. And, you know, that was success. You know, but nobody could seem to get there. You know, it was no different with my bands or Rick's bands. Like, we used to kid each other about our bands. Rick had a band at one time called General Mud, so Mike and I never let him forget it. You know, it's like we'd be in the dressing room, you know, years later and say, "Hey, where's the guitar player from General Mud? Is he around?" You know, it was great. You know, and I had all these. I had a band called Mondo Plus 4, so they used to remind me of that. Is the drummer from Mondo Plus 4 here? You know, so none of these bands did anything. But with the answer to your question is when the three of us came together, for some reason or other, you know, from the very moment that we first started, it was like there was this electricity that was, you know, you could almost burn your finger on it. It was so hot with the audience. And so we had conceived of the band as being high energy. We'd conceived of the band of having, even doing it at a small level, like in high schools and the small gigs that we started with. We started with the idea, you know, we're going to have way more lights and way more sound system, and we're going to have pyro, and we're going to have, like, it was based on the idea that it should be theatrical. And when Mike and I found Rick, it was really funny because Mike and I had this whole idea. We had a whole thing about fire. Our first poster had flames on it, and you know, I was kind of obsessed with that myself. And when we met Rick, he was playing in a band where it was kind of theatrical. You know, like we walked in and they were doing sort of progressive rock, but you know, they had I forget what they had, some funky lights and maybe a mirror ball or something, and they. You know, they did things that a lot of bands just didn't do. You know, that band was called Act 3. They were quite good. So he bought into that whole philosophy when he came on with Mike and I, and it was a never-ending pursuit. I mean, by the time we, succeeded and we were playing concerts and up into arenas and stuff, I spent a lot of time working with the lighting designers and the laser companies and the pyro company, always trying to make the show more dramatic and more theatrical and more exciting. Band like Alice Cooper that I saw when I was a kid. Showed me, that, with very little, like with chicken feathers and a few, strobe lights and stuff, what he was able to do. And I always just thought it made it a lot more exciting. Same thing with Kiss. Like Kiss was, remember the first time seeing Kiss, and I just thought, wow, this is neat. They had police sirens going and all this stuff, and it just made the whole experience really, exciting.